The next speaker is myself, Deborah Golino, and I'm the Director of Foundation Plant Foundation Plant Services. We changed our name from Foundation Plant Materials Service over 10 years ago, but I still get caught every now and then. And I'm going to be talking to you about the source of Cabernet clones here in California in the United States. My talk will be a very good segue to the next talk, which will be from Christophe, and he will be talking about the source of Untitled clones from France of Cabernet, naturally the home of Cabernet Sauvignon. So I think it'll be a good lead-in. You have a very nice handout put together by Nancy Sweet of the clonal information that I'll be discussing, and so I don't think you'll be needing to take very many notes, but first, I'd like to define clones. People discuss clones from a large number of different points of view, and one of my favorite definitions is the one in Hortus III, the Bible of many of us who are interested in horticulture. A clone is a plant propagated by asexual or vegetative means, including divisions, buds, cuttings, layers, etc. Such methods are especially used with plants that do not come true to seed. Clone is a horticultural rather than taxonomic term. Two other definitions, rather more related to grape growing. A clone is a group of vines of a uniform type propagated vegetatively from an original mother vine. And a clone is a population of plants, all members of which are descendants by vegetative propagation of a single individual. In the usage of the grape and wine industry, a clone is a variant of a variety that is unique in some detectable way. And I think that's the way most people in the grape and wine industry use it. Now, in characterizing clones, we need to define a number of other terms. A variety is a genetically distinct cultivar. And in some cases, we talk about different grapevine varieties when in fact what we have is sports, which are clones, and the Pinot Noir family of varieties would be a good example. Some grape growers, particularly in traditional European areas, rather than going to clonal selection where a single plant is propagated many times, prefer mass selection, which should technically include a wide variety of clones. The problems with doing vineyard mass selection, however, is you really don't know how much clonal diversity you're starting with. Clones evolve over long periods of time due to small mutations and differentiation in genetic expression, and so it does take extremely long periods of time for clonal diversity to occur. If a vineyard is propagated from a single source, let's say a unique vine found in the wild appealed to a grower many generations ago. If that single vine was used to propagate a vineyard, it would take a tremendous amount of time, thousands and thousands of years, for very much clonal diversity to develop in most horticultural crops. So clonal selection involves picking a particular individual plant, propagating it, and using that, capturing that particular set of unique characteristics of that clone. And some researchers have some clonal programs have even gone to subcloning those clones. And we have sometimes seen diversity in subclones, which really surprises us. So what kinds of characteristics differentiate one clone from another? Sometimes it's the vine growth characteristics, whether the vine is upright, weeping, has higher low yields compared to the mean of other clones. Leaf characteristics can differentiate clones. Some clones of a particular variety, I'm thinking about some of the Zinfandels that Jim Wolpert has collected around the state, for instance. Some of the leaves might be more or less lobed. Cluster characteristics might be different. Some more compact, some looser. Berry characteristics can differ: color, size, shape, maturity, pH. And flavor characteristics, the level of anthocyanins, the color. Some Chardonnays, for instance, have a muscat character, which is desirable or desired by some winemakers. And then some wine characters also are believed to be different, sensory perceptions, etc. Foundation Plant Materials Service is the repository of the majority of clonal grape material in the United States. There are a number of other programs through the United States, and some of those are working very hard to grow, but the vast majority of clonal grapevine materials and newly imported clones come through Foundation Plant Materials Service, which is a service center in the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences here on campus. Essentially, what we do is to take a grapevine, even the light's not going, is to take a new grape selection, a foreign import, a domestic selection that has value as a heritage selection, or even new varieties and rootstocks that have been produced by breeders, table grapes, wine grapes, rootstocks. There's still active breeding programs for those here in California. We do disease testing, particularly screening for viral diseases that can be propagated when a vine is propagated, because those diseases are best controlled in a clean plant center. If the diseases are there, we do virus elimination therapy. If not, the selection or clone can be moved forward to the Foundation Vineyard, professionally identified, and then move on to registration in the California Registration and Certification Program for grapes, which is a program we carry out with the state of California and California nurseries. And normally, growers don't get material directly from FPS. Normally, nurseries get the material for us. They're the professionals in terms of mass propagation and producing grafted plants, and then they go on to sell to growers. You can get rid of viruses if they're in plants by using heat therapy, or by using shoot tip culture. And shoot tip culture is the preferred technique today. Your brochure about the program at FPS has a pretty good description of both the therapy processes and some illustrations there as well, if that interests you. It can take 2 years for a vine to come through quarantine. The tests take that long. If it has virus when it comes into the program at FPS, it can be 5, 6, 7 years before we are able to take that plant through therapy and then repeat the testing process, the 2-year testing process, which must be entirely repeated. Now, one thing that is very different about the FPS program and most clonal programs in Europe, and you'll hear Christophe speak about this in a few minutes, is that we do not do clonal evaluation at FPS. We strictly look at the phytosanitary, the plant health issues for the materials, and the identification issues, and we have some wonderful technology now for DNA identification at the varietal level. And then we move those materials into the hands of UC researchers, our farm advisors out in the counties, wineries, etc., for the evaluation process. And that's because the funds for clonal evaluation in the States are very limited. I think some of the European countries, and we'll be hearing about the French program soon, have shown a lot of foresight in investing what is literally millions of dollars into their clonal evaluation programs. But one of our frustrations at FPS, and I know it's a frustration for all of you as well, is that we do not have information about many of our new clones. However, the speed of industry, the speed of business in this country is so intense that I think that given the limitations of our funding, the best thing we can do is to put these materials into your hands and then let you evaluate them out in your vineyards and at your winery. Now, what kind of data do you take in a clonal evaluation? And this is a table I took from Jim Wolpert's article in the Symposium on Clonal Selection Proceedings from 1995. You can look at information about pruning weight, shoot weight, yield, cluster numbers, juice maturity, especially sugar and acidity, and shoot weight, cluster weight, berries per cluster. Now, all of these factors are affected by the presence of virus, and that's why clonal evaluation is meaningless unless you also are working with material that have been screened for and from which viruses have been eliminated. For instance, grapevine fan leaf virus. You can see a healthy and an affected cluster of grapes. The virus causes poor set. It causes sharp berries that don't have proper seeds in them, that don't develop normally. Obviously, something that's affecting yield and fruit quality that way is going to interfere with any kind of clonal evaluation you could do on a selection that was infected. Leaf roll's the same. You see a cluster of grapes with and without leaf roll infected on the right. You have delayed fruit maturity, poor sugars, poor pigmentation. Here's some data from some of my French colleagues, Walter and Legan, and they looked at 2 different Chardonnay clones and 2 different Pinot Noir clones. And we'll just look at the difference between the non-inoculated and the leaf roll inoculated performance. And we're looking at probable alcohol content, which is a European way of expressing expressing sugar, excuse me. And you see differences of 42% in yield, 19% in sugar, 50% in yield, 14% in sugar, etc. Obviously, the virus is having a profound effect on both yield and fruit quality. I've done some trials with my colleague Jim Wolpert and our staff research associates looking at sugar levels with and without viruses on a number of different rootstocks. You can see here this is fruit data expressed as bricks from 2 years of harvest, 4 different virus treatments, including rupestris stem pitting, which we believe is a mild virus. It's a relief to see that there was no significant effect of the rupestris stem pitting compared to the healthy on sugars, but you can see 2 different leaf roll treatments had profound effects on sugar, and it varied rootstock to rootstock. And you can see here also that with the different rootstocks, you get quite different symptoms. Rupestris stem pitting, I said, was a mild virus. It's in many clones, many European wine grape clones. About, I would say, roughly 15% of the FPS registered stock has rupestris stem pitting. We feel that because it's in so many important clones, and we know that it's a mild virus, we think it's better to distribute material with this than not. But at the same time, you can see the Dijon Chardonnay 95 on 3 rootstocks. On the St. George, we do definitely see pitting and grooving on the wood cylinder of 2-year-old vines. There are very severe damaging viruses in Europe, and many of them are not yet in the United States. Several of our serious problems, like vine mealybug, we think have come to us in the United States due to illegal importation of grapevine materials. We think vine mealybug came because we've done DNA analysis of the populations in California. We think they came on table grapes smuggled in to the Coachella Valley, and you all know the price we're paying for that. So the reason we take that 2 years to bring things through quarantine is to avoid introducing these exotic pests and diseases to the industry here. In the New World, our vineyards are relatively clean compared to the Old World, where grapes co-evolve with many pests and diseases that we don't have here. Now, when we start talking about plant material, we have to talk a little bit about the fact that many plant materials are associated with intellectual property. Plants can be patented, they can be trademarked, they can be sold and bought according to business trade secret law and to contracting law. And so when we talk about clones today, you'll see that some of the selections of Cabernet Sauvignon that are of interest are safeguarded by some of these legal constraints, trademarking and contracting in particular in the case of Cabernet clones. You can't patent a clone, but a clone can be trademarked and distributed under contract. And for people who have done expensive clonal evaluation work like the folks at Ontov, that is how they return value to the program that developed the clones. So let's talk a little bit about Cabernet Sauvignon. You'll be hearing from people with more expertise than I later today, but it's a late ripening variety that does well in relatively warm climates. It is a vigorous grower. The berries are small, round, blue-black with thick skins, and the leaf is quite characteristic. It's a very deep-leaf 5-lobe leaf with shot-hole lateral sinuses. At FPS, we have a large number now of Cabernet Sauvignon clones. You have these details in your packet, and I will go through a little bit of the history of these clones for you today. We have clones that have come from California Heritage vineyards. Obviously, most of those had their origins in Europe many years before. A great deal of those importations were just before the turn of the 19th century. We have clones from Argentina, Chile, Germany, Italy, and certainly not last, wonderful clones from France. The clones from California at FPS, These include selections that Harold Omo, the grape breeder and viticulturalist that founded many of our programs here at Davis today, made. He got some selections from the Cundy estate, from Larkmead Vineyards in Oakville at the Experiment Station, and he brought many of those selections to FPS around 1963 when he first started doing some of his early clonal selection. Some of those selections that Harold brought in, the Oakville Selection 02, came to the FPS program in 1965, so we've had a lot of years to have experience with that one. Cabernet Sauvignon FPS 06 is known as the Jackson Selection. On the Ivy website, you'll find a nice history of the Jackson collection, which was up in the foothills, established by Hildegard, rediscovered by Dr. Austin Goheen, who was the USDA plant pathologist and virologist here for many, many years at Davis. It came to FPS around 1965, and it's lower yielding than the popular FPS 08, which is also known as the Concannon selection. Now you'll notice I talk about selections rather than clones. At FPS we use the word selection because in many cases we don't have the opportunity to do the large replicated tests that would be required to show whether one clone or another is truly different. If we do therapy to a particular selection that comes in with virus, we might have 2 or 3, or from the old heat treatment days, even 5 or 6 different heat-treated progeny from that original selection, and they all get different numbers because they could conceivably have different performance and different disease status. And so when we say selections, it's not quite synonymous with clones, and I believe you have an article in your packet talking a little bit about those differences. Cabernet Sauvignon 7, 8, and 11 are from a single source that was selected by Harold Omo at Concannon Vineyard in Livermore. Nancy Sweet, who is the web manager for the National Grape Registry, is also beginning to serve a role as our FPS historian. She's working closely with Susan Nelson-Klook, our grape manager of many years. And she contacted Jim Concannon about the source of FPS 07, 08, and 11, different heat treatments of the Concannon material. And I believe this is the first time it's been announced publicly that that material was introduced from France by Jim Concannon's grandfather in the year 1904, and we have copies of that correspondence. I was really thrilled to be able to find that out, and I think Nancy did a wonderful job. I'm starting to call her Lois Lane these days. So, Cabernet Sauvignon 24, that was sourced from Laurel Glen in Sonoma in 1988. It was found free of virus in the field and registered in 1994. We have some other Napa selections. 23 and 22 are both from a Napa vineyard in 1986. 40 is from Mount Eden Vineyard, was brought to us as a donation by Kendall Jackson Winery in 2001. And then Larry Hyde, who's with us today, generously donated many of his clones that he's been collecting over a lifetime for his vineyard. And one of his clones, one of his early Cabernet clones, has been released as FPS number 42. The 3 sources were Nebom Coppola from an Inglenook planting, which had a history going back into the 1930s, a Disney Silverado selection, and then a selection from the old Tokelon vineyard at Mondavi. Phil was a vice president at Mondavi at that time, and he'll be talking to us this afternoon about his experience with wine growing of Cabernet Sauvignon. So FPS 29 is the Nebom Coppola, 30 is the Disney Silverado, which is known as the C clone, and 31 is the Mondavi selection from Tokelon. And Scott McLeod will be joining us, our last speaker of the day, and talking about what his winery, Nebom Coppola and now Rubicon, have done with that selection 29 in their winemaking program. Jim Wolpert and I planted a trial of the original virus-infected Cabernet against the cleaned up new FPS selection of each one of these 3 heritage clones. These vines were in a clonal block that Jim will be talking about later today, where we were comparing all of the clones available in the registration program at the time the trial was planted. The work of a clonal evaluator is one that is never done, because as new clones come out, of course, new trials are also needed, or additions need to be made to existing trials. Now, I don't have a pointer. I apologize for that. We'll try to get that fixed during the break. But the clones are in order. So the first gold and green bar of yield, cluster weight, berries, and berry weight are clone 29, then clone 30, and then clone 31. And one of the really dramatic things that stands out is that even though these 3 Cabernet clones had a similar virus profile, in fact, the effect of getting rid of the virus on each of them was different. We don't know at this time whether that's because the clone had a different response to virus or because there were different strains of the virus in the 3 different selections. So that's an interesting question we're going to be trying to answer with some future trials. But you can see that at least in 2 cases, the virus depressed significantly yield, cluster weight, and sugar. Berry weight didn't seem to be much affected. And then the other thing that jumps out at you here, and I think probably Jim will be talking about this some more, is that the clone 31 is very low yielding compared to the other 2 heritage clones. And this has come out not only in this trial, but also in many, many growers' experience who have used that clone before. Tim Mondavi says that they still like that clone very much despite its low yields because of its wine quality, but it is significantly lower yielding than the other. We have clones from Argentina and Chile, a Cabernet 04 and 05 from Mendoza, Argentina, introduced in 1964, and FPS selections 12, 13, 14, 19, 20, and 21, which came from a single source in Chile in 1971. Clones from France. We have a number of French selections that came to us unofficially and are what we call generic selections. And then we also have the official French clonal material from Ontav INRA, which Ontav has partnered with a number of California nurseries who are licensees, including Sunridge Nursery, California Grapevine Nursery, Herrick, and Mercier. And these are part of the official French Clonal Evaluation and certification program. And I'm not going to talk about that very much. Christophe will be speaking about that just after our break. But these are very important. Then we have a number of clones that are what we call generic French clones. They were already in the United States before the Ontav program came here, and we do not know what their authenticity is. We can tell you what they were reported to be, but many of them have since been through shoot tip culture because many of them came to us virus infected. And so basically all of those we really need to evaluate fresh as if they were new clones. We have an exciting new series of Cabernet coming into our program, which we are calling the Vincent series. St. Vincent is the patron saint of winemakers in France. And a anonymous and well-respected producer of French wine near Bordeaux is importing some of that winery's favorite Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc clones for one of their U.S. ventures, and has been kind enough to gift those clones to the public program, and those are going to be released next year, the first of those. Most of those had virus and have to go through therapy. And then we have some other European clones. We have some Italian clones. We have some Italian clones, or Cabernet that came from Italy. Obviously, its distant origins were probably France. FPS 38 and 39 came from Canigliano in Italy in 1988 because of our working relationship with the folks there in their clean plant program. Both of those did go through tissue culture. We have a German clone, FPS 10. It came from the State Teaching and Research Institute for Agriculture in Neustadt, and it came to FPS in 1959 and underwent heat treatment. Now, to see more information about these clones as it develops, first of all, we are adding to the National Grape Registry. This is the website that Nancy maintains that has very detailed clonal information about those clones where we've been able to put it together. It's a work in progress. We're building all the time. This is where we have that synonym search engine as well. We really would like your feedback on this, on the utility of the website. If you catch some mistakes that we might have made, we'd really appreciate you letting us know about them. We want your feedback on this site. And we are, this fall in the FPS newsletter, any of you who are not subscribers and would like to subscribe, the email address to get a subscription is on the newsletter that you have in your packet. We will be putting out an article like the Chardonnay article that's in your newsletter. We're going to be putting out an article on Cabernet Sauvignon this fall in our newsletter. You've got the preliminary information in your handout, but there's more to come. And we'd be glad to add anyone who would like to be added to our subscription list. And that information will also ultimately reside on this website. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that the programs at FPS would not be possible without the support we receive for our research from the American Vineyard Foundation and the support we receive for our clean plant programs from the nurseries through the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Fruit Tree, Nut Tree, and Grapevine Improvement Advisory Board. Is it any surprise we call that IAB for their support of our efforts to provide a world-class clean?
I just was wondering, when you're bringing in new clonal varieties and doing the virus testing, how do you determine which of those three, the tissue, heat treatment, or shoot tip to?
The question was, how do we determine what kind of viral therapy to perform? In the past, the only therapy we had other than looking for escapes was the heat treatment. But the heat treatment involves propagating maybe 50 plants on a rootstock and growing them in a growth chamber for months, many months, and then trying to find something that has escaped. And the rate of success of that was not that high. And it's very labor intensive. It's very easy to lose an entire batch of plants. Over the 1990s, the American Vineyard Foundation funded our work on optimizing shoot tip culture for regenerating plants, grape plants without virus. And that technique has now become so robust and successful that we only need to regenerate 4 plants to have pretty much 100% chance of success in creating a clean selection. And so we go automatically to the shoot tip culture now. We bring some things in with the public money, which is limited, and those might sit in what we call our garage, waiting for therapy for quite a few years. Sometimes I'll bring in material when I have the opportunity, knowing that it might be later before I have funding for the therapy, which is quite expensive. But in the case of materials where there's a sponsor paying for the work, we can actually start shoot tip therapy before we even finish the testing, and that can speed things up quite a bit. Over here.
Testing on the heritage clones to know that they are in fact different clones than, let's say, something like 7 and 8?
I'll leave that for Jim Wolpert. He's going to be talking about the Clonal Evaluation that he started at Oakville of all of those clones, and I think he's got some early data that suggests that maybe they are a little bit different.